Well, thank you very much, Mark, and indeed it is a pleasure for me to be back here again this year, and it's a little bit unique in 2024 that we're in our number two session of the Cattlemen's Conference, and to have two of these put back to back from year to year is kind of unique, and I think the way we got here was also pretty interesting, and I'll share a little bit of that with you as I make some presentation on why we are here. You know, and Mark Johnson, Mark McCauley did a wonderful job last year of kind of going through the history of these conferences and also talking a little bit about why we were here in 2023. And I think many of you sitting out here, as we talked about last year, remember the incredible influential people that were a part of these conferences in the past, the likes of Dr. Gary Smith, Dr. Harlan Ritchie, Roy Wallace, Henry Gardner, and some of the input that they had that over time, from moving from subjective measurements or types, just trends and phenotype, we move these conferences into looking at more objective measurements. And boy, I think we talked about this last year. You know, Mark Gardner gave a great presentation last year, but I think Henry and Roy would be flabbergasted at the tools and the technology that we have available to us today to make some of the breeding decisions and looking towards the future. I think the sky's the limit. We haven't even touched the capabilities of the tools ahead, and I think this is a very exciting time. I was visiting with Mark before we got started. A lot of familiar faces from last year, but some new faces, and I'll tell you what, there's some very influential people in this crowd in terms of technology and where we're headed. And so I'll reiterate what Mark said: engage, because these folks have a lot of knowledge. They can answer a lot of questions, and I think it's a great opportunity to share some thoughts and ideas. So I'm going to go over some of the slides that I actually presented last year. If you would, please, Bray, we'll move on to the next one. As I change my role here this year, I'm going to kick us off because I kind of finished this up last year, and Mark already touched on the first slide that we're going to talk about. We're here because the truth is more important than the trend. We're right here in Tadoshek Arena, and again, where it's been done before, and the history of this, other than Cindy Pribble has already pointed out that those damn seats are pretty uncomfortable to sit in for 2 days. So maybe one of our sponsors the next time are going to furnish us some cushions. Is that right, Mark? I think that's what we're going to do as we move forward. But any rate, great history here, and I think that statement, Mark McCauley brought that up last year, is incredible. And Mark Johnson already stated the importance of that. The trend is good, truth is better, and we got to look at ourselves in the mirror every once in a while, and we got to say, have we gone too far? What are the unintended consequences of some of the decisions that we make? And I think it'll be very interesting as we go throughout the next day and a half to kind of go through some of that. Next slide, please. I started my finish last year with this slide. It was interesting, in my opinion. There had never been a time at these conferences that we talked about soil and soil health. But let's think about this for a minute. The good Lord is not producing any more land. Not one more ounce of land is he going to produce. I read here just a while back the number of acres per day that get taken out of agriculture is astounding. And the population continues to grow worldwide. So as producers in this protein world, we got to be more efficient. We're going to have to do more with less. It's that simple. We're going to have to continue to push ourselves a little bit. And so I think soil health is key. You know, you folks right here in Oklahoma until recently, as well as us in Missouri, knew the effects of drought and what it could do. As Mark stated, cow numbers are at an all-time low. And frankly, I haven't convinced myself that we're ever going to build the cow herd back to where it was a few years ago. We've got an aging population in our business. We have some restrictions on input costs, restrictions from a political standpoint, and we're never going to get rid of cows to the point that we can't produce a lot of beef. But we're going to continue to push ourselves to do a little bit more with less as we move forward to feed this growing population. Next slide, please. This slide pertained last year to what we talked about extensively, and that is about in-product merit and quality beef product. And now moving, again, our protein source is one of the most accepted and most demanded. Per capita consumption has finally gone up a bit, again, in beef, even with high cost, and that's important. I talked a lot about, or a little bit last year, about the importance, in my opinion, the historical move at American Angus Association in terms of certified Angus beef and the branded product. We heard Dr. Mayfie last year about the beef audit tell us about consumer preferences of branded programs, high quality programs, and how we are again pushing ourselves a little bit more in terms of transparency and the fact that we need to know, we need to be good animal husbandry folks as well. Animal welfare and care is continuing to be on the mind of the consumer. And one of the statements that Mark McCulley made last year is we're going to have to continue to think backwards, right? So start at the consumer and think backwards and how we're doing some of our mating decisions. And I thought that was very earth-shattering. We've seen all of the information from the consumer trends last year. Dr. Hardcastle, again, was a part of that. So you can go on, Bray, to the next slide. And you talk about what the trend or the changes have made and the actual advantages that we have now in terms of consumer acceptance of the quality of the product, as well as their belief and their assurance that we as producers are doing the right thing not only to our animals but to our environment. And I think that's key as we move forward and think about some of the things that we're going to discuss over the next couple of days. Dr. Hardcastle from Cargill shared the same message, right? And I think it was an interesting statement. Last year, the group that I led, or the group that I had with John Stitka, Dr. Thayer, and Miles, and David Lawman, it was an interesting group because we talked about in-product merit. John talked about growing carcass weight. And again, having to produce more, because if we can be more efficient even at the packer level as we put an animal on the hook and bring it down the line, it's just as easy or easier to get more pounds per hook, if you will. And so all of these things are important, but where does that become a consequence? What are the consequences that we have associated with that? Dr. Lawman did a wonderful job of talking to us about cow efficiency and a little bit about crossbreeding. Dr. Thurer talked about the issues that we have in the feedlot, the high-octane, high-growth cattle, and some of the issues that we have as we get to the end of life of those animals. And so I thought it was interesting. I thought it challenged us a little bit there. But again, we're going to have to push the limits as best we can. The next slide I have is just one about selection indexes, and we had a great panel talking about the number of traits that we have, and do selection indexes actually do a wonderful job. Matt Spangler, Gerald Callahan, Mark Gardner, all of those gave their opinion on where we were and what we needed to maybe focus on. One thing I can tell you as a seed stock producer, and whether you're that or a commercial cattleman, I'll just tell you right now, we're not going to take away traits of interest, right? Genetic evaluations are going to continue to push the limit on the number of traits that we produce. And so if we can add them or develop indexes that take into account the good and the bad of the traits and not lead us down a road of maybe going a bit too far, is certainly very, very important. The next slide I have is about genomic enhanced EPDs. And again, all breed associations as well as commercial cattlemen are implementing the use of genomics. Ken Anderson and others were part of a group discussion about where we are and where we're headed in this particular area. And the one thing that we find, and again, if we can predict and take some risk out of animals that we use to make our next genetic decision, I think there's absolutely no reason to go backwards here. And again, beyond genetic abnormality and surveillance, the ability to make predictions in cattle is incredibly stronger today than it's ever been, and it's going to continue to get better as we add more information to the genomic component. I did want to talk briefly here because I think, Mark, we were just talking a little bit about the pork industry and their ability in a more fully integrated approach to production. of how they're able to share information back and forth and up and down the line and make breeding decisions based off of that. They use breed complementary within those systems, and I think it's really important as we move forward to figure out a way that we can begin to share more data. I'm not talking about being fully integrated in the beef production system, but we need to share more information. And how can we collect more of that data at the packer level and feed it back to the producers as well as the seed stock part of our industry? Because I think there would be no question that there's a bull or two that are sold every year in every breed could absolutely move the industry forward that at times gets lost in the production system because they're used on a commercial cow herd. The cattle change hand a couple or three times. They get to a feed yard, they ring the dinger, and we know nothing about what the sires of those cattle are. And so I think there's no question that we need to be able to kind of collect that data and move it up and down the pipeline as we go forward. The next slide kind of looks at kind of one of the more interesting panels we had last year that Scott Greiner chaired or kind of did. If you remember, one of the more entertaining panels, which you'd expect. We had people like Jim Williams, Gary Buchholz, we had Blake Bloomberg, and beyond. I got to tell you, Mark, it was interesting to me. The only time that I ever seen Blake Bloomberg be quiet, because Jim Williams and Gary Buchholz took control there and did a wonderful job. Stephen Marchman was a part of that group, if I remember, talking about the integrity and the reputation of judges and what we see in the show ring. I thought it was very entertaining, and I thought they made some incredible points, but good group there. The next slide kind of pertained to the group that Blake had. Christy Collins and Gerald Buck. I think maybe Chad Holtkamp was on that group. And they talked about integrity and in marketing, and I bring up this slide of Anxiety the Fourth that sits in our office at the HA. And the interesting part, in my opinion, of this slide is I'm pretty sure that photoshopping was a part of the system way back then, right? I think this bull probably has a little bit of photoshopping going on with his look, and so we've tried to have to get through that a little bit, but just think about the way we market animals today online. So I'll share this little story. Most of you know my family still has some cattle. We have a couple of online sales at different times between my son and my wife and I, and we had one this spring, and our top selling heifer brought a lot of money. The folks never seen her. Never sent anybody to see her, right? They looked at a video, called and had a couple of questions, and so our ability to market animals today, that sale was held on a Tuesday. We took pictures 2 weeks prior to that. We put information together, and in 2 weeks' time, we were able to have a very strong sale of a set of heifer calves. So our ability to market has changed, and I think it's really, really interesting. The next slide goes back to my comment about Gretchen Mayfie and some of the others that we had in terms of what consumers are asking for in terms of branded programs. They want to have confidence in what they're buying in terms of quality, as well as some of the animal issues, animal welfare, and our environmental footprint as we move forward, and I think that will continue to be important. So looking to the future, or what the next slide is going to be where I ended last year, and I feel very strongly about the 3 points on here as well, and I think it brings us to where we're going to get this thing kicked off. And it's talking a little bit about as we move forward, who's going to own data, who's going to own the genotypes, and who's going to own the genetics. There's always conversation about this, right? I just mentioned the pork and the poultry industries that are fully integrated. They have access to all of this. They own their own. They use it for genetic evaluation, make breeding decisions based off this. We're not fully integrated in the beef cattle industry. I would have told you when I started at the American Hereford Association 21 years ago, I would have been compelled to tell you that I didn't think that would ever happen. I do believe we're on a plane that it could happen. I don't think maybe to the point of being fully integrated, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be important for us to share information and data. And so we're going to have a way to do that and yet still make ourselves as seed stock producers, having our autonomy to make those breeding decisions based on our own. Gene editing, maybe one of the biggest buzzwords that there is, and I look around this crowd and I think about the people in the area of gene editing in the beef cattle industry and the influence that they have. If you didn't come for any other part of this conference, please be here for their presentation. It's going to be incredibly useful in terms of knowledge. Give us the truth. Tell us what it really does, what it really means, and give us and arm us with the ability to market this as we move forward. I think it'll be interesting to hear from Dave Faber about the history. We got Tad and John Allison talking about some of the things that are going on. It's astonishing what this technology is capable of doing. And so I hope that you engage with them very, very strongly and kind of ask questions, get questions answered, and go home with better knowledge of what's happening in this area. And lastly, the one thing that, in my opinion, should not be controversial, right? But we didn't hear about it much last year in the conference, and that's the value of crossbreeding and hybrid vigor. I don't care your breed affiliation. There are some inherent values, both maternal and direct, to crossbreeding. And so when I left with this slide last year, I was driving home, and Mark and Gerald called me on the way home. And they said, you brought up some good points. We better do this again next year. So congratulations to Mark and to all of your staff. We're here, and we're here to talk about the things that I think are important. This is how we're going to get kicked off. Let's get started, Mark. I'll be anxious to hear the next couple days. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Well done. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Bob Weber, Kansas State University. Bob is a professor